going to call one of our colleagues from IMD. He's British origin, even though he says that, you know, he's barely lived there for a long time. And, you know, another thing about him that is good is that, you know, after 20-something years teaching at the University of St. Gallen, he actually saw the light, right, and finally came to us, right? So welcome, Simon Evenett.
There you go. Right.
Oh, you need no slides, huh?
No slides.
Good.
Where's the power and what's the point? That much I remember from my time teaching at Oxford. We had one professor of technology who was adamant about not using that technology. There you go.
Fantastic. Thanks again.
Anyway, thank you very much for the invitation to be here. This is a very inspiring event, bringing together so many different people. As I was just said, I'm very new to the canton. I've only lived here for a year, and I've learned more, I think, in this hour about the canton and what it can bring to the progress, not just in this country, but in the world. And it is inspiring to be with so many people. Now, I have the unenviable task of describing how our world is changing in a geopolitical sense that changes in the way in which we try and solve critical societal problems. Now, I want to be very, very clear. Although I'm going to describe a series of developments, I don't particularly like the direction that we're going in. And one thing is for sure in terms of my worldview is that we cannot give up on the idea of progress. We cannot give up on the idea that as a community, as a world, we need to move together, improving health, as we've just heard. Earlier, we heard from Christian about the importance of improving the environment. And also, I would argue, even more broadly, improving well-being. We cannot give up on this idea, and I will return to that at the end of my talk. Nevertheless, I do think we need to upgrade the assumptions that we bring to solving these problems. And I think there are three major changes which have occurred, which might alter how you think about how you tackle problems. Now, at the most obvious level, we see increasing confrontation between countries, within countries. Jean-Philippe has already talked about that, so I will not repeat. This is there. Underlying that, I think, are two important, very important drivers. At the international level, we have a contest for primacy globally between the United States and China, and regionally, for example, with respect to Russia and its neighbors. These contests have re-emerged after a period of lull, and they are calling into question a number of assumptions. One of the ways in which these contests for primacy are changing things is by putting on the table a way of thinking that we are not used to. I am very used to thinking about, when I work with teams and with colleagues, about how do we develop positive sum outcomes? How do we work together to advance a topic? When it comes to geopolitical dynamics, increasingly we see some decision makers thinking in negative sum terms. So Christian, I think, showed us a chart of the global Gini coefficient going down, right? In principle, this is a very good thing. I would celebrate that too. But when you dig a little deeper, the reason that global inequality is going down is because China and India are growing very fast. And when I talk to my friends in Washington, where I started my career, to some of them, every gain and improvement by China is a loss by the United States. So for them, the mindset, the way they look at data like that is not with a positive sum mindset, it is with a negative sum mindset. And we have an increasing number of players, state actors and also firms who stand behind them, especially on the national security agenda, who are arguing in negative sum terms. To see why this is important, just think about a trade war. Everyone knows that trade wars harm everyone involved. The United States knows that when it commits a trade war, starts a trade war with China, it is going to hurt itself. from a positive-sum mindset, we would never do a trade war. From a negative-sum mindset, on the other hand, a trade war becomes something you will entertain if you can hurt the other party more than you can hurt yourself. Yep. And this is a very important feature which is now being incorporated more and more by sophisticated firms and governments. We have a series of negative-sum players who are out there. A second consequence of this more confrontational world is that many files and policies which used to be kept in separate silos are now being blurred. So in the area which I started my career in, international trade, we always kept national security matters in a separate file that was dealt with by different people along a different track. Increasingly now, we see national security concerns affecting and driving trade policy in some jurisdictions and driving reactions. And this blurring across topics is one thing which is difficult. Let me give you an example of how this plays out in practice. If we take a wind farm, which we have many leading European companies which can develop that technology and have developed that technology, a wind farm can be seen as contributing very positively to the energy transition. However, if that wind farm is made up of parts and components from countries which are geopolitical rivals, then some people have articulated a concern that the wind farm could be collecting data and transmitting data across borders to another country. And secondly, that piece of equipment might have a kill switch which would stop the wind farm from working, and that kill switch is used by a foreign government to undermine our well-being. Right? So once you start thinking, once you allow the lines between trade and security or business and security to become blurred, then all sorts of risks emerge which you might not have otherwise thought about. Just to add another way of thinking about this, here is more of an exercise for you. Think about a driverless electric vehicle. Is this a great business innovation, or is it a national security threat, or both? Okay? And once you start thinking in those terms, then you begin to look very different. You begin to understand why people are worried on security grounds, are not very keen on some countries' electric vehicles being on their streets. Okay? And so this change in thinking is occurring. The third dimension that we're seeing, and I'll now sort of move more towards the opportunities, but first let me put on the table the third dimension, is that states are marshalling and mobilizing resources in order to address their security concerns. So we have seen significant sums being spent on rearmament. How they will be spent, whether they will be spent wisely, etc., etc. These are considerations which are important and we should follow. But we're also seeing governments repurpose their industrial policy expenditures as well. One of my teams tracks systematically the industrial policy spending of around 70 different jurisdictions, and there has been a marked change in 2025 compared to 2023 and 2024. We have seen the share of industrial policy initiatives motivated by climate and environmental concerns fall a lot in the West, a little bit in the rest of the world, but a lot in the West, and the share associated and directed by or motivated by geopolitical and national security considerations increasing significantly. And so we are seeing governments redeploying industrial policy funds or developing new initiatives to support security considerations. In a way, though, at first that sounds very negative if you want to advance the sustainability and climate agenda, but the smarter, more forward-looking firms that we have coming to IMD are already beginning to recognize that they need to take their products and redesign them so as to meet security objectives. So take that wind farm that I described earlier. That wind farm is now being those wind farms are now being redesigned with many more components which are less problematic and with technologies which can offer a level of security. And of course, the point these companies will make to their possible potential customers is, yes, we are going to support the clean energy transition and the price of energy matters, but we're also offering you security as well. And so finding ways to find customers to pay for that innovation is one way of keeping at least that critical technology alive. And that sort of leads me to my next point, which is that the world may be changing in ways that we don't necessarily like and following the trajectory I have just described, but periods of confrontation between states have often been periods of incredible innovation. Have been phases where both the private sector, universities, research institutes, civil society, as well as governments, have innovated and generated path-breaking innovations. And I think rather than just looking at the downside in geopolitics, and there is quite a lot of downside, we should also be looking at to what extent we can mobilize our resources to innovate even more effectively going forward. And I think history is very much, the evidence is very much on the side that sort of patents, patent numbers, innovation, path-through, breakthrough innovations happen more often during periods of confrontation. And so I think this is, and if you were looking for an upside to possible geopolitical dynamics, this would be it. My last observation is to return to this notion of well-being. And when I was asked to give this presentation, I asked myself, what is a structured way of thinking about well-being and its different dimensions? And I was led back in doing the thinking for this particular speech to the work of Amartya Sen, where he argued that development was freedom, or freedom was development. He is not making a libertarian case. He argued that freedom is both the objective as well as the means for better well-being. And what he had in mind was that our goal should be to try and enable populations to live lives with the maximum number of choices, where individuals have the capabilities and the resources to be able to live a life that they choose, not that someone else chooses. And so there's a strong element here of autonomy and choice. There is also a very strong element here of building capabilities, individual capabilities and societal capabilities, which support individuals to make the choices that they want to make. And furthermore, there is also an important theme in his way of thinking about what he calls getting rid of unfreedoms, that is, things that hold people back, fears which prevent them from advancing their lives and their families as well. So Sen's way of looking at development and well-being, improving well-being, is very multidimensional, and I would argue that as we broaden from sustainability to well-being, it may well make sense to return to Sen's perspective of how do we build capabilities, or how do we allow individuals to build the capabilities that they can make the choices that they want about their lives, respecting their autonomy. So I think as we look into this period of geopolitics, it's an excellent opportunity to reset our assumptions about how the world works, to make sure that we are not caught up in some of the negative blowback which is there. And I've identified 3 ways in which the world has changed. I remain committed to the notion, and I hope you will, of progress, and I find Sen's way of thinking about developing capabilities so that people have the freedom to make the choices to live the life that they want is a very appealing one, and I hope that we will together go on this journey here in Canton Vaud. Thank you.
Stick with me just
stick with you, okay.
Just for a couple of questions. Many questions about the fact that, you talked about instability and, the new trends. How does it connect, in your view, to the ecological transition? Is it something that is going to completely kill it or not? And how do you see that?
So it doesn't have to. And when I looked at the industrial policy motive numbers, which I mentioned earlier, you could look at that in a very negative way, saying, oh, the share of new initiatives which are associated with the ecological factor, these is going down. But then when you realize that the people or companies which are trying to develop those innovations can also sort of argue that their products or services could be ones which help on the security side as well, then you don't have to give up on environmental improvement, ecological improvement, the renewable energy transition, in some sense, you just have to repurpose it slightly.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that's the element of hope that I have, of hope that I have. Now, can you point to examples where conflicts lead to ecological destruction? Of course you can.
Right.
But this story, we don't have to let this be an entirely negative story.
Okay, and let's just take a second question. You talked quite a bit about the security imperatives or the new discussions around that, and there are also a lot of conspiracy theories, right? Which are probably even fostered even more by social media and stuff like this. What do you think about that? And I mean, in a way, aren't we sometimes chasing something that is not even real, but that is almost fake?
So look, I think we have learned, especially in the last 5 years or so, the potential downsides of a lot of, or how social media tools are being used, either to manipulate us and alike. And I think we're getting smarter about this, right? When I listen to students, friends, colleagues, I think people are really making quite thoughtful choices about how to engage with social media and how to contribute to it. Mainly because there is quite a lot of toxic stuff out there, especially on some platforms. So yes, it can be a vehicle, but it's a little bit like fire, right? We know fires can do a lot of damage, but we haven't banned fires. We're just careful about how we create heat and use it, yeah? And I think that's the type of transition that we're going through with social media, for sure.
Okay. Yep. Thank you very much, Simon.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.